My name is Rocky, like Rocky Balboa, but we are not here today to learn some boxing. I grew up in the Philippines where, it has one of the largest coral reefs in the world. Actually, that is one of my goals to spread awareness, educate the locals, and maybe talk to the resorts there, tell them how to protect the reefs because it's so sad. The future generations won't see them anymore. You are here today because you have a goal to have an award winning reef tank. I did it 5 years ago. I didn't know anything. I started reefing without knowing anything at all. And you guys can do it too. I want you to have that mindset that if I can do it, you can do it too. Well, not just a beautiful and thriving reef tank, like I said, a winning reef tank. If you told me 5 years ago that I will be featured in magazines or I will be talking in front of these people, I'll tell you you're crazy. Or and I'll probably block you too. I currently have 6 saltwater tanks. Right now, you see the far left, that's a frag tank. The next one is an eShop's 4.8-gallon mixed reef. That's actually 2 years old. And the anemone tank, which is also eShop's. Also, George is kind enough. He gave me one of his tank. You see the green carpet anemone, that's his tank. And the last one is a macroalgae eShop's drop down. So right now, and I don't know how I managed to have all these tanks, but I have 6 tanks now. I also have a koi pond. So I actually have freshwater and saltwater tanks. And in fact, when I was 8 years old, I started freshwater. And then 5 years ago, I, you know, took the challenge to get and set up my first saltwater tank. So the freshwater people probably thinking, ah, you betrayed us. But in 5 years, I got first featured on BRS TV Reacts on Bulk Reef Supply YouTube channel, also on Worldwide Corals YouTube channel, also Coral Magazine on their Aquarium Portrait last July last year, 2023, and also Coral Magazine in Germany on May last May of 2023. So that happened, in a very short period of time. And I have a story because one day I was in front of my tank. That was 2022, and the reef tank. There sometimes it gets to you because you do everything, and then sometimes you see the coral's not happy, and you're like, what am I doing wrong? So sometimes it's stressing you out, and that's normal. And I said, well, I'm not gonna take this tank down until I get featured in a magazine. And a few months after, the Coral magazine messaged me on Instagram, so that was good. And since then, I kept my reef tank. All right. Also, I become a Reef to Reef of the Month last May this year. And also, I won the Tank of the Month grand prize winner by Polo Reef. And I was able to, they paid my round trip ticket to New York. And you can actually watch it on their YouTube channel. It was fun. It was the best trip. And last but not the least, I am the first Top Shelf Aquatics Coral Smackdown Coral Grow Out Contest champion, beating Polo Reef. That felt great. All right. So in addition to that, over the years, I was able to get sponsorship, and because of those sponsorships, I'm able to continue the hobby because this hobby is not cheap. But I'm not here to discourage you because that is my number one tip of the day. Reefing shouldn't have to be expensive, and I tell you why. So let's travel back half a decade ago in 2019, where I set up my first ever saltwater tank. So in 2019, I woke up one morning and told my family, I want to have an aquarium again in the house. And they asked, what fish are you going to have? And I said, cichlids. Because I had cichlids before. I loved it. I was able to raise cichlids from eggs, sell them. And like I said, since I was 8 years old, I've been keeping fresh water. They said, well, if you're going to have an aquarium in the house, it has to be salt water. And I said, Are you guys crazy? I don't know about salt water at all. All of those fish are gonna die. And they said, well, if you want an aquarium, it has to be salt water. What a family. So, long story short, I looked on OfferUp and found this used 40-gallon reef tank. It's not even drilled because, like I said, I wanted a cichlid tank. But that's my first reef tank. It's a 40-gallon tank. And the rest is history. All right, so I got this tank in the house, and one morning I went to Lowe's to get a play sand. You know those play sand in Lowe's? So I used that. Oh my god, it's already not looking good, right? My first tank, I used a play sand. Then I went to PetSmart to get a salt to so I can mix my own salt. Then the next day I put some fish already in the tank. I didn't even cycle the tank. Oh my god. And it gets worse. The following week, I decided to add some more fish the following week. So I fed the fish. They ate it. They seemed happy. Left the house and went to my local fish store. So while I was choosing my new fish, I told the guy who was working there. His name was Jason. I will never forget that day. So to test my water, that's the best thing I did to bring sample water of my tank to have them test. And then he came back. He said, I can't sell you any more fish. And I'm like, I was so confused. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, well, your nitrite is so high. It's like it's way up there. And I said, but my fish are all happy. They ate. I left the house. They ate the food. They seem like they're smiling, you know. But he said, well, I'm not gonna sell you a fish. So I left. I was pretty disappointed, and I came home and guess what? All of the fish were dead. This is true. This is true story. I'm not making it up. I was so confused because they ate the food when I left, but when I came back, they're all dead, and the guy was right. So my tip number two should is research. You have to do a research. All right, we need to learn the basics first. So in reefing, especially in reefing, there's so many methods that are working, but it all goes back to basics. And every tank is different. My method may be working for me, but it might not work for you. So definitely research. So since then, I got on track, and that led me where I am today. And because I was able to learn from researching, I was able to give the fish and also the corals. So actually, the photos taken by myself in 2019, and that's the first time I learned about corals. So the first 3 months, I enjoyed it so much that I decided to actually upgrade to a 150-gallon tank. It's also used that I found on OfferUp, actually Craigslist. Believe it or not, this tank actually got me featured on the BRS TV Reacts on YouTube channel in 2019 because, and I remember they were talking about my aquascape. So let's talk about aquascape. So to have an award-winning reef tank, one must consider the aquascape. When doing your aquascape, you think about the setup you're gonna have, the corals you're gonna have, and you have to plan it. You just don't stack rocks. You have to think about the future and what your tank is gonna look like when all of these corals become colonies. Because it doesn't your aquascape, whatever it is right now, it doesn't matter because once the corals grow into colonies, they're gonna cover though the aquascape. So you have to plan, you have to actually envision your aquascape. So you can design your aquascape, but like I said, remember the coral's gonna grow. So aquascape is not just how you stack the corals, and coral placement is also very important. You must consider at the very beginning as as once a coral encrusts on the rocks, it is very difficult to move it and may result to, messing up your aquascape, then a possibility of it collapsing. Actually, I don't glue my rockscape because I like moving them around, but the consequence or the disadvantage of not gluing your rockscape is a possibility of collapsing the entire rockscape. So you have to be careful. So both have definitely disadvantage. But again, you have to plan it at the very beginning. So shortly after that, I decided to upgrade again to 270-gallon display, which is my tank right now. So in 1 year, I upgraded twice because it gets you get addicted, and you have to take to post like that if you have a big tank. It works. So I upgraded twice in 1 year. Um, and of course, because the tank's now bigger than what it used to be, I have to buy new lights. I have to add lighting. So let's talk about lighting. It is very important. All right. So there's, as you know, there's so many lights in the market that can grow corals. There's metal halides. There's T5, and LEDs. Any of those can grow lights, and it's a matter of you know what works for you, because also the lights, they give you different look, depending on the spectrum. So you have to do, again, research what works for you, and also your budget, again, preferred look of the tank, the ability to change the intensity and spectrum, and also convenience, because do you really want to change bulbs every year, or do you like the convenience of setting it and then forget, which you get from the T5, I mean, sorry, the LEDs. But no matter or whatever you choose and your reason, you have to know your light. So how do you know your light? So you need to know your par, in the tank, and the intensity. And I'm not saying the specs or whatever it's on the box, or on the seller's website. I mean to, again, know your par and spectrum. Very important, because knowing your par or your intensity of the light, you can ask yourself, is are my lights enough? Do you need to add more unit? Do you need to adjust your schedule or and intensity? All of those would depend on the type of corals. Also, do you have? So if you have a par meter, that's great, but you can also rent a par meter online, or you can check your local fish store. Definitely, I recommend to test or to check your par in the tank. So we talk about lighting. Now let's talk about flow, which is my favorite, and also at the same time I hate it. The reason, because it led me to some sleepless nights, because for me, this is the most difficult to adjust, or to set the flow. Um, it is one of the most important, especially for SPS dominant tank, because flow can be challenging also for mixed reef tank, which I have, and it is not easy. So you have to position the power heads, because every corals have their own flow requirement, and SPS needs more flow than LPS. You can't have the same flow strength for both Acropora and LPS. But at the same time, you cannot blast them with flow as well. So the goal is to have random and alternating flow. And actually, you can buy those, power heads. If you buy both, you can, like, there's an automatic setting where they can be alternating. But if you can't afford those, because they can be expensive, you can, if you have like different brands of power heads, you can just put a timer on both. Like, for example, you run the power head, one power head, 10 to 15 seconds, and then turn it off for 5 seconds, have the other power head run for another 10, 15 seconds, and so on and so forth. But you can only do that if you have a controller. And actually, that's my setup right now, because I have like different brands of power heads. So it's difficult, the flow, but the goal is to have random. All right, very important. And I think, everyone says stability. It has said so many times, because it is very important. Um, especially with alkalinity, calcium, and magnesium. So I also, when I add temperature, pH and salinity, for me, those are the magic six. Magic six. Alkalinity, magnesium, calcium, temperature, pH, and salinity. So I get a lot of questions on Instagram from reefers, and I'm surprised like how many actually do not know about their numbers, especially those magic six. So those are the basics. And if you aren't that responsible to know those, I'm sorry, but this hobby is not for you. Those are the basics. You have to know those. Like if someone asks you what are your alkalinity, magnesium, calcium, you have to know immediately. So how do you keep them stable? So to keep them stable, you have to test, test, test. That's the only way. You have to test. So there are a lot of test kits, as you know, in the market. You just have to find the most accurate ones. And if you do not like the manual testing, there are also those controllers you can buy, like the Neptune systems, Apex, or Hydros. I love those. I love the controllers because you can check the values of your tank even if when you're at home or when you're on vacation. The convenience is great with those controllers, and also you can adjust the dosing based on the results. So you do not have to worry about it when you're away. And also the controllers have these temperature, pH, and salinity probes. So by testing is only a one step to knowing your tank, which is my next tip. You have to know your tank, like in personal level. Know your tank way more than you know your wife or husband. So, as a reefer, you should know as much as every aspect of your reef tank. And we talk about the flow, the lighting. So, by knowing those, you should already know where to put your specific corals, even a specific aquapora, for example, because not all aquaporas are the same. They have different lighting requirement, and as we discussed, when we talk about aquascape, but knowing your tank doesn't end there. Let's talk about salt. There are multiple brands of salt in the market, as we know. All should have or give you the same initial result, but not all salt is equal. Some have higher alkalinity, some have lower alkalinity. So my tip is to pick your salt closest to the numbers you run in your tank. But for me, that doesn't end there. If you do regular water changes and if you want to be ahead of your game, you need to know what's in your salt. And I'm not talking about just alkalinity, magnesium, calcium. You need to know everything. So I'm talking about the trace elements. And I know a lot of people that I talk to, they don't really care about the trace elements. That's fine. But if you want to be ahead of your game and if you want to be, featured, for example, in a magazine, you also have to work on your trace elements. So when I started my 270-gallon tank, the first thing that I did is to not just care about, the major elements or the magic six, like the calcium, magnesium, alkalinity. I also really focused on the trace elements, such as the nickel, chromium, boron, all that, each individual elements. Well, thanks to my friend who actually told me about it in 2020. That's why I told him, when he set up his reef tank again, I'll send him a frag tank to say thank you, because that I think is why I got this thriving reef tank, because I focus also on the trace elements. Some of you may been following me on Instagram, and actually in 3 years I have not done any water changes at all, believe it or not. So what I do is I only dose the trace elements. I keep everything stable, alkalinity, magnesium, and I dose those trace elements. But until very recently, I actually did a little water changes because I had to siphon my sand bed. Because for me, not to scare you, our tanks for me is like a ticking bomb. You know, it's up to us. It's up to you how you maintain it. So once in a while, I would still, siphon the sand bed, and of course, I have no choice but to replace the water. But I call it preventative maintenance, not a regular maintenance. So you're probably asking, how do you know your salt? Because when you buy your salt, they only tell you about alkalinity, magnesium, calcium. So the answer is you have to send an ICP test. Like there's companies like Othiamo, ATI. You have to know your salt. And again, know your tank by knowing your salt. So you have to send an ICP test by sending your sample water to these companies. So I said for 3 years, I only dose trace elements, but you just don't dose trace elements. You also have to know the value of those trace elements. Never ever dose anything in your tank without knowing the values of those trace elements. So, how do you know the value of your trace elements? Also, by ICP test, by sending the ICP test. So, there's this program that I follow very early on of my reefing journey. And this, I think, one of the big reasons why I was able to have this beautiful tank for only 4 years, because I just set it up 4 years ago, even though I started reefing 5 years ago. So what I did 4 years ago or 3 years ago, I found out about the program. I sent a water sample for an ICP test every 2 weeks for 3 months. 2 weeks for 3 months. But the program actually recommends to send every 2 weeks for at least 6 months to a year, but it can be very expensive. So I did it for only 3 months, every 2 weeks. So within that 3 months, I was able to get the average of all those ICP test results. I put it in an Excel sheet, and I was able to get the average of all the trace elements and know my corals consumption. So from there, I was able to know how much to dose every day. But remember also that as your corals grow into colonies, or as you add more corals into the tank, because at this point you're already like addicted to coral, so you keep on buying. So as you add more, as the corals grow, you have to dose more trace elements as well. And again, you just don't dose trace elements, because if you do, it's a disaster waiting to happen. So what I did, so after I did every 2 weeks ICP test for 3 months, now I send ICP test every 2 to 3 months for a year. So I was able to adjust. Oh, okay, this trace elements, I dose a little bit more. I'll back down a little bit. So again, ICP test, and you have to know your tank. But now actually I only do every 6 months. But if you're rich, it's good to send ICP test. But that of course also apply if you wanna dose trace elements and at the same time do water change as well. It's fine. As long as you know what's in your tank. It's very important. And that is only if you want to be ahead of the game. All right. So because the corals love it very much, and as they grow, as you add more corals, right now all you have to really do is to be patient, sit back, relax, and enjoy. I would also put there, when adding corals, you have to dip. You just don't dump it because you're too excited, because if you don't dip, it's going to be another setback if you're unlucky, because you may get some pests. So I recommend also to dip your corals, no matter where you get your corals. Even if you get your corals from me, you have to dip. You have to be patient. You have to do all those stuff. So all of that has been said and done. Now that you have a beautiful and thriving reef tank, and one day you're invited to be one of the contestants in a coral grow out contest with other amazing reefers in the hobby, how can you be ahead of the game and actually win it? Because remember, this time everyone knows their tank. Everyone know their tank, and they know where to put the corals. They know the sweetest spot. So how can you be ahead of the game? So my tip, this is what I did, and I think this is what made me won the contest. So remember, when knowing your tank, you also have to do some experiment. You know, so when I did that, I did some experiment, and I found out that if you glue your acrofrags sideways, not the normal when when you glue, you just put the frag. You have to um glue it sideways. And I found out that the frogs will actually grow faster. But how can you tell which side of the frag? Because it just doesn't end there. You just don't glue sideways. You actually have to find the best side of the frag. And I challenge you to do that. If you buy a coral, aquafrag today, do that, and it's gonna grow faster. So to pick the side, so you have to inspect the frag, which one, of course, obviously the healthiest side of the frag, and also you will notice, these, I call it sprouts. Like it will be it's very obvious. Like you see it, like it almost like want to grow out more branches. So you have to carefully inspect the frag and pick the best side. So the best side should, face the lighting, and then of course the not best side will be shadowed. So that's what I did when I entered the coral growth contest, and it worked. And when you enter a coral grow-out contest, when you receive the frags, the competition begins. It is too late to do some experimentation. So you put the frags on where you know because at this point you should already know your tank. So you put the frags on the sweetest spot where it gets, the best spectrum, the best flow. You put it there. Don't put it on the frag rack because it may grow, but you will never win. You will never win if you leave it on the frag rack. And actually, that tip, I actually put it in the Coral magazine where I was featured way before the contest happened. It was there. So thankfully, maybe my competitors didn't read it, so they didn't apply it. So speaking of a magazine, you have this beautiful and thriving reef tank, right? You, how do you get featured in magazines? How do you get awards, recognitions? The simple answer is to be on social media. If you have a reef tank, it's beautiful and you keep it to yourself, you're not going to get all these awards. You have to be on social media. You have to post your progress. You have to share your knowledge, help people, and all these companies will come to you. They will all sponsor you. And you started with, used equipment. Now you're going to have these fire equipment. You have to be on social media, which, by the way, please follow me on IG, the Carlito. And that is how you get discovered. And before you know it, you're going to be standing on this very stage, sharing your knowledge in front of many aspiring reefers in a show like Aquashella. Thank you, everyone.